I want to thank Skillshare for sponsoring today's video. Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Haley with Haley Stitches, and today I'm going to show you how to make a super cute one charm pack quilt. This is the perfect pattern if you have a charm pack where you really want to highlight those fabrics. All we're doing is sewing a simple patchwork quilt, but we're turning the fabric to a 45-degree angle. This is called an on-point quilt. You can download a copy of the free pattern using the link in the description below. This pattern will be free for the next week, and after that you can grab it for a low cost in my shop. So grab your charm pack and let's get started. These are the supplies we'll need to make today's project, and you probably already have them in your sewing room. We'll need a 1/4 yard of background fabric, one charm pack, we'll be using 41 squares out of the 42, a rotary cutter, a rotary mat, and a long quilting ruler. I'm also going to be using this 9-inch square ruler to make cutting a little bit easier. And you'll also want a coordinating thread. I always use the color Dove by Aurifil. Everything I'm using will be linked in the description below. The first thing we're going to do is cut our background fabric. So from this 1/4 yard of fabric, we're going to cut a 7 5/8 width of fabric strip. And my quilting ruler is only 6 inches wide, so I'm going to use the lines on my mat to help me measure this. But you do want to make sure that the lines on your mat are the same measurement as your ruler, otherwise your cut will be a little bit off. So I am actually going to cut an 8-inch strip just to make this a little bit easier, and then when I subcut it down into squares, I'll get that more precise 7 5/8 inch measurement. So from this width of fabric strip, we're first going to cut off the selvage edge because we don't want that in our quilt, and then we are going to cut 4 7 5/8 inch squares and 2 4 1/8 inch squares. And normally I don't like working with these like 5/8 and 1/8 measurements, but because this quilt is on point, it makes the math a little bit more complicated, I guess, than what I usually like to work with. So that's the reasoning for these kind of 5/8 and 1/8 measurements. And then with the rest of this, we are going to cut our 4 1/8 inch squares. After cutting, we'll have 4 7 5/8 inch squares and 2 4 1/8 inch squares. And now we're going to cut these down into smaller triangles. So for the smaller squares, all you'll do is cut them in half along the diagonal. And we'll cut the larger squares into fourths. So to do this, I'm going to take my long quilting ruler and line it up diagonal to diagonal and then cut. And then without using my fabric, I'm going to repeat that from the opposite diagonal to diagonal. And this will give me a total of 4 triangles from each larger square. Repeat this process to make a total of 16 set-in triangles and 4 corner triangles. And before we continue, I want to talk about the sponsor of today's video. Every once in a while, I like to go back to the basics with quilting. It's so easy to get caught up in those big projects, but it's really refreshing to slow down and revisit those core skills. I recently found a class on Skillshare that's perfect for that. It's called Sewing Your First Quilt Block, a quilting project for beginners by Esther Narioshi. Even if you've been quilting for years, it's such a great refresher. Esther shares some smart tips that have me thinking, okay, yes, I needed that reminder. Skillshare is an online learning platform that has thousands of creative classes. Think quilting, sewing, knitting, crochet, all the good stuff. The classes are broken up into short, manageable lessons so you can learn or relearn at your own pace whenever you have a few minutes. And if you're like me and always looking for an excuse to start a new project, it's kind of the perfect place to get inspired. If you want to give Skillshare a try, you can test it out using their 7-day free trial. And I love that they have a 30-day money-back guarantee. The first 500 people to use the link in the description of this video or click the QR code will receive 20% off their first year of Skillshare. Get started today. Now we're going to work through our charm pack fabric. So a charm pack is 42 pre-cut 5-inch squares. It makes quilting super convenient because you don't have to subcut all those squares. They just come as is. For this quilt, we're going to use 41 of the 42 squares. So I already removed one of the squares. I just chose a white square that I thought would blend into my background a little bit too much. And what we're going to do, just to kind of show you how this on-point layout works, is I'm going to take 4 of these squares out. And in a normal patchwork quilt, you would just sew these together in a row. But for an on-point quilt, you're going to actually turn them all at a 45-degree angle. So you can see there's no really good way to sew these together. So instead of sewing row by row, you have to sew by each diagonal row. So when we lay out all of the set-in triangles, the corner triangles, and the 5-inch squares, you kind of get a better look at how we're going to assemble this. So from diagonal to diagonal will be our row instead of what you would think of a typical row or column in a quilt. So the triangles that are on the top and the sides are called set-in triangles, and the triangles in the corner are called the corner triangles. We're going to start assembling this quilt in the top left corner, so let's zoom in and get a better look at how we're going to do this. So first, what I'm going to do is sew the corner triangle on this corner blue square, and we want to sew it middle to middle. So what we'll do is fold each of these pieces in half to find the center point, and I'm just going to press it with my finger. You don't need a lasting mark or anything. You just need to be able to see where to line these pieces up, and I'm going to place them. You can pin if you want to, but we're going to sew at this point. After you sew these pieces together, you will see the overhang of the triangles, or what people call them dog ears. They're called lots of things, and you can just trim these off. You don't have to square up these dog ears every single time you're sewing a row together because they will get trimmed up at the very end. But for these corner triangles, I do like to square them up. It just makes assembly a little bit easier, in my opinion, for these corners. And now to finish this first row, we're going to take our set-in triangles and we're going to place them so the 90-degree angles are touching the 5-inch square. And this will give us that flat side on the bottom where we can attach the next row. So we'll sew each of these triangles to either side of the 5-inch square. And I'm pressing out towards the set-in triangles. So now we'll work on our second row of the quilt. So I'm going to lay out those triangles and the 5-inch squares, and we'll just sew this row together. So all the 5-inch squares together with the set-in triangles on the end. And for pressing, we want to make sure that all of the seams are in opposite directions so that our seams all nest nicely. So to do this, you'll just always press towards the set-in triangles. So for the second row, I'm pressing towards the set-in triangles, and then I'm pressing towards the center of that pink square, and that will make it so everything nests. So as long as you're following that, everything will line up nicely. So now I will show you how to sew the rows together after you sew all of these diagonal rows. You'll just flip it on itself, use a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and the seams will nest nicely like this. And then you will have that overhang on the edges, but again, when you square up your quilt at the very end, all of these will get snipped off, so you don't have to worry about it too much as you're piecing this whole quilt. So you'll repeat that process for all of your 41 squares and triangles, and you'll end up with a quilt that's a little bit bigger than 32 inches. So this is a great baby or doll quilt, and you can repeat this process with a layer cake to make it even bigger. Remember, you can find a link to this pattern in the description of this video, and in the pinned comment and description, you can take advantage of that awesome deal by Skillshare. I'll see you next time.